One of the perks I've been told about living in Los Angeles is that there are lots of celebrities around. And when you first move to Los Angeles, the people who are stuck in whatever hellhole it is you crawled out of to come here always ask you, have you met any celebrities? Have you met any celebrities? And then you go through this thing where you're like, well, I saw Ray Bradbury shopping for cantaloupes. Does that count? Or if it's the 90s, you think, well, I keep running into Angeline everywhere I go, but nobody outside of Los Angeles knows who she is or thinks that she's a celebrity. And in my case, also, it was like, well, there was the guy who lived next door to me who used to be in the New Monkees when that was a thing, but I don't really think that that counts. And then you always go through, after you've been here for a while, you go through this thing where you see someone you kind of recognize, and then you have that moment where you have to decide whether you're going to approach them and say, did I go to high school with you, or did you do a guest shot on some cheesy comedy I don't want to admit that I watch? And usually I would just ignore them. And then also there's this other weird thing where sometimes you meet people whose parents are celebrities or whose parents are very important in the entertainment industry. And then you have to decide, is this a real friendship, or should I risk throwing this all away in the craven hope that this might be the time that someone might actually help me with my career? Which never happens. I wrote this next part down because I didn't want to get it wrong. You'll have to explain that to me later. The Mark Twain Prize for American Humor is given to the individual who has made a significant contribution to American humor. It's been given every year since 1998. And there's a big special. The Kennedy Center has like a big deal, and it's on TV. Prior winners to this include Richard Pryor, Lily Tomlin, Neil Simon, Tina Fey. The actual prize is a replica of a 1884 bronze sculpture of Mark Twain by Carl Gerhardt, who I assume was a sculptor. Because although I'm willing to research this, apparently I only go 2 clicks deep. And in 2008, the Mark Twain Prize for Comedy was given to George Carlin. And 4 days after it was announced that he was getting the prize, he died. I'm not making a causal relationship between those two events. I think even though the name of this show has the word lie in it, we can all stipulate, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that everyone here loves or should love George Carlin. In fact, anyone in their right mind, anyone who loves words or comedy or truth or goodness should love George Carlin. When I was a kid, I had a bunch of George Carlin's comedy records on vinyl. If you're not a hipster and you're under the age of 30, ask your parents what that is. And I would listen to them at night with headphones because even though my parents knew I had these albums, it still seemed very subversive. And when I got older, I would read all of the books that George Carlin wrote, and I realized that although he's primarily known as a stand-up comedian, this is someone who deeply loves the English language and deeply loves finding the exact right word and the exact right phrase and working with rhythms and shades and nuances of meanings. And when during that brief period in my life that I don't understand, when I was development executive for HBO, I met George Carlin at an event, and I should have said to him how much his work meant to me when I was growing up, but I didn't because I'm an idiot. And then he died, but again, I'm not making a causal connection between those two events, and I have an alibi. Years later, I became friends with George's daughter, Kelly, who has a great book that you all should buy and read, or at least buy, called A Carlin Home Companion Growing Up with George, which is just fantastic. And one day, Kelly and her husband were going out of town, and they said that they wanted someone who would dog sit for them. They had 2 dogs. They had this dog named Stella, who was young and yappy and would jump up about this high, about 4 feet high, for those of you on the podcast, and grab whatever food was around. And then they had this old, maybe 18-year-old dog named Ned. And Ned was a big old hound who would sort of look at you like, I could jump up if I wanted to, and my legs were better, but I'm not going to bother, and besides, you should feed me because I have seen things you can never even imagine. So I was dog sitting. I went over to dog sit and to find out all of the things I needed to know to dog sit, and I am hyper responsible and a Virgo. So when I went over there, I asked them where the fire extinguisher was and where the water shutoff valve was, and Kelly said to me, you know, no one's ever asked us that before, and it kind of scares me. And to be fair, it's kind of scary. I don't believe in astrology at all, but I'm told that part of being a Virgo is defined by doing things like asking where the water shutoff valve is. So there's that. When I was dog sitting, one night, every time I would take Ned out for a walk, Ned would sort of lumber around the block. And Ned wouldn't exactly bark, would sort of mumble and gripe about not really wanting to poop in the way that old people do. And he was very, very much like an old man kind of dog by this point. And he would demand that he be fed at early bird hours, like 4 o'clock, and he would grumble if anyone was on his lawn. And at 9:30, he thought everyone should be in bed, and if you didn't go to bed, he would bark until you went to bed. One night, I was up late because I was watching TV, and Ned was barking and barking because it was 9:45 and then almost 10 o'clock. And finally, I didn't want the neighbors to call the police, so I went to bed. And around 3 in the morning, there was a loud noise. And I looked up, and Ned jumped on the bed and looked at me like, explain this. And I said, it's squirrels. And Ned kept looking at me, and he was thinking, I know what squirrels sound like. That's not squirrels. And I said, really, Ned, it's squirrels. Go back to sleep. And I laid down, and I went back to sleep, and Ned sort of grumbled and barked for about 10 minutes, and then he went into the corner, and he went to sleep. Around 45 minutes later, I jumped up. I was afraid, I should mention, that Ned was going to die on my watch. And he was very, very old and a little bit incontinent and had trouble getting up the stairs. And I kept thinking, not only am I going to disappoint my friend, but this essentially is George Carlin's grandson, or at least the closest he would get. And I should not be killing the grandchildren of my childhood heroes. I called at one point the regular dog sitter, and I confessed that I had this fear that Ned was going to die. And the regular dog sitter said to me, why do you think I'm not dog sitting? So I went back to sleep, and at 4:14 in the morning, I woke up with a start, and I sat up in bed, and I thought to myself, no, 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 no. And I could hear Stella in the corner breathing, but I couldn't hear Ned. And I looked all around, and I couldn't see where Ned was. And then I heard the sound from the kitchen, and it was Ned breathing. And then Ned ran into the bedroom. And I said, what's going on? And Ned ran into the living room. And in the living room was George Carlin's Mark Twain Prize for Humor, which was awarded posthumously because he died 4 days afterwards. And Ned ran in there and bumped into the Mark Twain Prize. And I heard this, and I jumped up, and faster than you could say, shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits, I was in the living room, and I reached out, and I just managed to grab the Mark Twain Prize before it fell to the floor and broke into a million pieces. And then there was that moment where it was kind of in my hands, and I still could bobble it, and I had this memory of every gym class I'd ever been in where I dropped every single fly ball hit to me, and I was thinking, no, what am I going to do? And then I thought, I may have to actually kill the dog to draw attention away from the fact that I've broken the Mark Twain Prize, and that's crazy because clearly it would have been the dog's fault, but I wasn't thinking straight because it was 4:14 in the morning, and I got the prize and I put it back on the shelf. And Ned looked at me like, can we go for a walk already? And I got my clothes on and I took him all around the block. It took an hour and a half. He peed everywhere. He pointed out every single tree that the squirrels liked, as if to prove to me that that earlier sound had not been squirrels. And finally he pooped, and I picked it up and I cleaned it because I am a Virgo. And I'm very responsible, and we got back to the house, and he was very happy. And I am very happy to report to you that I made it through. Ned survived. I did not destroy the house by fire or flood or any other means. And the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor remained intact, which I think of as a victory not only for myself, but for Ned and for Kelly, and in a very tiny way, for George Carlin. Thank you.
Alex Stein, ladies and gentlemen.